Okay, welcome today. My name is Peter Harrison. I'm from the New Zealand Association of Rationalists and Humanists. And obviously I'm also a member of the Reason and Science Society. And I'm also probably the chief protagonist in terms of developing the Keep Religion Out of Schools campaign that the NZARH is funding and supporting. So I thought I'd start off with a position. This is a position that the NZARH has held for some years in relation to separation of church and state and the education system. We strongly believe the government should be secular, that it is dealing with the issues of the world rather than following a religious agenda. Our law should not give one set of belief privilege over another, and the state should treat religious organisations the same as any other organisation. The rights and freedoms of belief and freedom of expression must be upheld, as long as these do not undermine other people's rights to safety and security. In relation to education, the New Zealand public education system was set up to be secular and still is in most cases. There are, however, too many cases where those running the school try to force their own beliefs on their students through the religious observance. The Education Act 1964 has incorporated a loophole to allow primary schools to close sections of the school for religious instructions where outside volunteers indoctrinate the children whose parents have opted them out. While public education should remain free from religious observance and instruction, it is fine to educate about religion. Teaching about different belief systems, both religious and non-religious, is important. Doing so encourages greater tolerance by broadening students' understanding of other beliefs and challenging the notion that any current held beliefs are somehow superior to other beliefs. We strongly believe that public education should be free, secular, and available equally to all children without discrimination. So that's been on the website for a number of years. The organisation until recently hasn't actually been actively doing anything about this belief. We've been advising parents. If parents come to us, we will give them information about what they can do and how they can try and promote change. But there hasn't really been an active network of parents, and there hasn't been an active promotion of secular values and challenging religious indoctrination in schools. So this is changing. We are definitely moving towards a more active period. So why now? Why are we campaigning now? Often parents are not informed of the religious indoctrination classes at all. Okay, so they don't know. The first thing they know about religious indoctrination is when their children come home and tell them about the indoctrination, whether that's a story about Noah or whatever. So they don't know that they're actually going to go in this religious indoctrination until their children actually come home and tell them about it. And only then can they approach the school and opt out. The schools also have a system of linking the values programs that they have. So if they have values in schools, which is actually a secular curriculum, valid curriculum activity, according to the NZARH, they link that with the religious indoctrination. And so by linking them up, they encourage or perhaps extort parents to participate in the religious aspects in order to get values education. So that even when the parents find out that their children are going to belong to these religious classes, they may feel guilty about opting their children out because they're going to be taking them out of the values programs. When children are taken out of these programs, so when a parent decides that, yes, we disagree, we want to take and opt out our child from religious education, the impact on the child is obviously sometimes quite severe. I mean, if you imagine we're talking about 6 and 7 year olds, they have a very delicate self-esteem. The opinions of their peers and their group are very important to them. And what this effectively does by opting out is remove them from the class environment, and it is perceived as being a punishment. Typically they're sent to the library, where they're not given anything to do. It's very much like a detention, and their peers treat them as if they're being sent to a detention. So it stigmatises children. And in some cases, unfortunately, it's gone further. Children are actually sent out to pick up rubbish and perform other degrading acts. Now, this is by no means universal. The actual practices of schools vary to a very great degree. I'm actually doing a survey currently. There's schools like Devonport Primary. They have a system where the religious education occurs completely out of school hours. All the parents have to opt in rather than having to opt out. They're very well informed about the religious. Devonport, I think, if you're going to have religious education, and I'm not proposing we do, but if you have to do it, you really want to let the parents know exactly what's going on. What exactly is the objective of the class, and give them the full consent, informed consent, to actually include their child. Unfortunately, this is not the usual practice. So here's some quotes from some parents. Even though we opted out of the program, on our daughter's enrolment form, her first day at school, she came home excited to show her first piece of homework, which was a colouring in page entitled, God Helps Noah. Needless to say, I got straight on the phone to the school office to ensure that indeed we did not want our daughter attending Bible class. Another parent. My school stealthily renamed Bible studies Values Education. We all like values, yes? Your school may use a similar trick. We just reread the last 2 years of school newsletters. Zero mention of religion or the right to opt out. How can you opt out if you don't know what's happening? Another parent. On occasions, she has come home feeling unhappy that she comes from a family that is different from the rest of the school. This feeling of estrangement is what is motivating me to speak to the school. In my opinion, it is wrong for the school to promote a program which incites these feelings in children. So the reason we got into this campaign isn't simply because of a matter of principle that we support separation of church and state. The reason is that there is real harm being done to children, both the children that are opting out in terms of being stigmatised, and the children who are opting in, who are being given a poor deal, essentially, because their parents believe that they're being taught values, but what they're actually being taught is religious indoctrination. I'll actually break this because is there any questions about, does anyone have any question about whether we should be having religious education, not religious education, but indoctrination? In other words, make a distinction between teaching about religion, which is something we support, and religious indoctrination, which is the act of indoctrination of children into a religion. Is there anyone here who thinks that the religious indoctrinating children in public schools into a religion is a good idea? No?
Not so much a question about that, but I presume this is largely or entirely primary school related, right? Does any of these programs occur in high schools as well? Or?
I'm not actually aware of well, that's not entirely true. The religious education in high school levels are usually in a different class of school. So there's, I'm trying to make the whole issue easier by talking about public schools that are clearly secular. There's another class of schools which are, they're called special character schools, and there are things like Catholic schools and so on. So they have a more concerted effort. So it starts at 7 or 8 years old, but it continues all the way through their higher education up until the university. So the difficulty with those schools, why we're not so vocal about those schools, is because people parents who send their children to these schools know full well that they're going to receive those kinds of education. Now, there is a question about whether we should be using public funds for those schools, but I think that's a less clear-cut and probably muddier problem than what we're dealing with secular schools where children don't have a choice about, and certainly parents don't have much of a choice about whether they attend.
Just real quick though, I'm assuming that this is pretty much 100% Christian religious education and not, are there any examples of ones where other groups have actually taken on?
I wasn't aware of any until tonight. Richard suggested there was there was an Islamic option at one school.
There would probably be a few others scattered here and there, but mainly probably 95% plus Christian.
Yeah, and probably more. Yes, it's vastly Christian. And that may change, but I think there's a disturbing trend in the UK, and the trend is that it's moving towards religious schools. So there are Muslim schools, obviously, in the UK, mostly Christian and other religions, but it's becoming a bit ghettoised. You're getting segregated children all over the place. Dawkins, for example, makes a good case that that's a negative direction in society. We don't want to be segregating children so that they don't mix, because ultimately they have to mix together, or it'll carry over, and we'll get to the situation where we'll actually encourage discrimination and segregation in the wider community. I don't think we don't have that in New Zealand, or at least not to the same extent, and I think that's a great thing.
On a similar note to my first question, are there any of these values education things that are non-religious?
Oh, heaps.
So
yes,
what's the? I mean, I don't really know. So what's the kind of the proportion that involve religion?
There are actually values education curriculums in most schools that are, we're doing a survey currently, and I can't give the results to it because it's in progress, but the results received so far would tend to indicate that most schools have a values program that is secular, whether or not they're religious. What they're doing is they're linking to that values program to the religious ones. So they're playing a bit of a bait and switch, if you like. They're talking about that they support secular or values education, and then they pretend that the religious education portion is part of that values. Which I guess, it's true in a trivial way. Yes, they do teach values in religious education, but it's not the primary motivation behind the teaching. The people who are involved in these programs are primarily fundamentalist Christians who are trying to promote their faith and have an absolute belief in it.
Can I ask, in terms of time, like how long?
How long do they spend each week? It's usually about half an hour a week. So they'll spend a Friday or some normally school time. So that, like for example, it'll be the last half hour of the school day on Fridays. They'll close the school. However, the closing of schools is rather interesting because they don't close all of the school. They might close 3 classrooms and the other ones stay open. So they're not actually, they're effectively using the loophole in the law to say that school is closed even though, functionally it's not. The children who don't participate in that class still aren't free to leave, for example. So it's not entirely clear what the definition of some of these things mean. What does it mean for a school to be closed, for example, if 3 or 4 other classes are open and the students that don't want to participate in religious education have to go off to the library and read books for half an hour. So it's a bit confusing.
I was wondering if you could further clarify about these Christian groups. Is it just one umbrella group of fundamentalist Christians, or are there several? Are these locally based? Is it a concerted campaign, or are you able to identify a particular?
There's mass. The primary our primary antagonist is an organisation called CDC, Christian something or other. I forget the exact CDC. If you look it up, cdc.org, I believe. So they provide. Their role is to provide all the materials for Christian education, and they have a whole lot of members. So most of the Christian denominations are a member of this organisation and endorse it, if you like. Most of the Christian denominations, except Catholicism, funnily enough, who are somewhat a little bit more removed. I don't think the Mormons are. So I mean, there's a few. It's not universal.
And just to follow up on that, is there also a creeping like American style creationism that's getting involved in this that would counter what the actual science says?
Very much so.
Yeah.
It's Christianity is quite diverse, so you get quite a breadth of opinion. It certainly wasn't as popular. I don't think creationism was. Let me think about this for a minute. I think it was more hidden. I'm not entirely certain. It was less in your face. I think you didn't quite have the fundamentalists running around screaming, to try and keep the Bible in schools and whatnot. Unfortunately, it's a bit anecdotal evidence, but I'm in a sort of a Christian family. My mother and father were Christian and so on. And I've been to church affairs, for example, and they'll talk about how ridiculous evolution is, for example. But they won't quite go as far as saying that the Bible is the literal word of God necessarily. At least as far as the Genesis account and so on. Whereas obviously the real serious fundamentalists, they're saying, the whole 9 yards, 6,000 years, Adam and Eve is the literal truth, and so on. And funnily enough, the Catholics can't even get their story straight on this particular issue. If you read, the Catholics like to say that they have a more sophisticated understanding of the Bible that sort of supersedes the literal interpretation, but as soon as you really press them, they start talking about the literal truth of Genesis, which sort of leaves me confused anyway. None of this particularly matters, I don't think. From the point of view of the topic, it doesn't really matter whether you're talking about Christian fundamentalists or Hindu or Islamic. I think the same principle applies, that we shouldn't be teaching any kind of indoctrination in schools. We should be educating children, not indoctrinating them, teaching them to think. So anyway, I was going to get on to what we can do about it, because it's all very. I think we all pretty much agree that it's not a great thing to be teaching, indoctrinating rather than teaching. But what can we do to turn the tide? Now I'm not sure. I was expecting a few parents to be along here. I'm not sure if there's any parents. No. Okay, any parents? There's some things. Actually, I'll skip over the things that I'm teaching parents and what they can do. But we'll talk about some of the things that general people can do who just want to get involved. So there's obviously things like talking to the kids, making sure they understand what the classes are about and why you're opting them out. So if you're opting the children out, talk to them about why you're doing it and make them feel safe about why you're doing it. Talking to other parents, we're developing a network which is called the Secular Education Network, and we're going to be trying to build communities of parents so that they don't feel isolated, because one of the big problems is when the only information you have is from the school and a certain slanted, basically told this is values programs and the whole religious side is de-emphasised. There needs to be some network which is saying, no, actually the truth is blah. And it's going to be completely evidence-based. We're going to actually get copies of the materials involved. okay, what's actually being used for the kids, and try and educate people about what's actually being taught. And of course, if people agree to that, if you're a Christian and you want to send your child along to this and be educated in that way, well, if it's what we're aiming for is informed consent, I guess, at the very least. So we need to talk to the principals of the school, and we need to be talking to the boards of trustees about why we object to these things. So we need to be making the case. And I don't think we don't want things like protests. We're not talking about marching down the streets with signs and ridiculous things like that. The approach of the NZARH anyway is to be putting forward compelling cases, to be talking about it in the media like we've been doing, to be writing papers, to communicate with the media, and take a meaningful stand in the media to promote that idea. Another way of attacking the problem is to get onto school boards. Again, this is more related to parents, but if we can get parents onto the school boards, that's where the decision-making process is taking place. So it's a case of, again, the network of parents can get together, one or two of them can stand up for board, and the other ones can promote them and vote for them so that they can make that change. Getting on to the things we can do, obviously we can write to MPs, write to the Ministry of Education, we can make complaints to the Human Rights Commission. Again, that's kind of contingent on, you sort of have to have a case related to that, so you'd have to know a child which has been disadvantaged, but all these things are possible. One I've done recently, talking on Talkback, bringing up, getting onto the media. We've been trying to get on TV, with no luck so far. Try and get that to happen. There's been a lot of writing to local paper, so they tend to get swamped. I guess that's the only problem with local papers. As soon as the issue comes out, you get a flood of letters from the Christian point of view, you get a flood of letters from the secular point of view. They publish a selection of them, but there's no real, I guess my only concern with that is there's no real dialogue occurring in that situation. People are just putting their point of view. It's good for communicating to the wider audience, but we're not really resolving anything, and you're not allowing the people who are reading those things to see the argument made in front of them, I guess. I always appreciated the discussions that Christopher Hitchens had. I think if it was just one person putting their point of view and another person putting their point of view, and you didn't let them interact, then it's a very sterile kind of conversation. If you let them interact, I think you get you can see the contrast and you can see the counterpoints much more clearly. So I enjoy doing that. I mean, these speeches are all very good, but they tend to be a lot more exciting if you have someone standing next to you trying to attack your position. Use the internet. I think we're all probably quite capable of logging on. We have Facebook accounts, or hopefully not everyone. Terrible disease, this Facebook thing, but obviously there's a lot of online resources now, so we can talk and communicate online, see if we can build communities through our online as well as in person. And obviously I have to give the plug. I'm from the NZARH, so joining us means that it's not very much for students, it's like $20. You get a really fantastic journal. I'm the editor, trust me. So that keeps you abreast of information. We're redeveloping the website. We're coming in from the dark ages a bit, we acknowledge that. But we're redeveloping the website, so there's going to be new forums. You can pay online. There'll be a whole lot of neat stuff going on our new website. It's very in the nascent stage at the moment. I'm the one doing it most of the time. But if you want to go to it, it's reason.org.nz. I'm also doing a bit of rebranding. So we're going to be using that forum to try and really promote this secular education network, try and get parents involved in the whole issue, and really forming real change, try and change the attitudes of schools and possibly even change the law. I think that's the big thing for us at the moment. We want to do a nationwide campaign to promote the idea of changing the law, get rid of the Nelson system, which is the one that allows schools to officially close, so that they will have to put the religious education completely outside of the domain of the school. They'll still be able to do things like hire out a school hall, for example, to have a religious event. But there won't be this business of having the children by default sort of shepherded into or given religious education without any permission from the parents. So I have a bit of information about the Secular Education Network if you want to join it. I won't go into detail of that, it's pretty much covered what I just said. And I also have here some the law with regard to, I won't go through this, if I haven't brought you to tears already, this is going to definitely do it. But I've got a copy of the law here if you want to know the details of have a discussion about that. But with that, I'll open the floor. Any other questions?
I guess one question would be, how would you go about removing the religious indoctrination without removing the cultural content that has resulted from said religion? I mean, there's a lot of what, of what is in our culture today that has come, from Christianity, that if they, don't know where it came from, they won't get a lot of the references that come up. How do you go about, I guess, how do you teach religious studies, I guess, without drifting into religious indoctrination?
Well, from my point of view, quite easily. I mean, in secondary school, we learned about politics. So we learned about the American independence and the development of Americans' political system. We learned about the Russian communism and so on. So I don't really see it as a problem. You're going to have all of the reference material, you're going to have all of the religious artifacts to be able to draw on, and the rich history of Christianity and all the other religions. So understanding the context is not really a problem. In fact, I might say even less of a problem than trying to teach Christians real Christianity. Because essentially, if you indoctrinate a Christian with certain ideas, especially things like the Bible is the perfect word of God, then trying to actually do an unbiased analysis of the Bible is going to be almost impossible. In fact, most of the former Christians on YouTube started off their process of deconversion through reading the Bible. I mean, there's a saying that the quickest way to create an atheist from a Christian is to get them to read the Bible. Most of them don't. I think I've come up with a term called the cultural Christian. They're someone who's been educated in Christianity through Sunday school primarily, or possibly even this kind of religious education, who have a very simplified, childlike understanding of what Christianity is all about. They've been taught about the love and all of the brilliant miracles that Jesus has done. Not much about the Old Testament, and not much about the true theological underpinnings of Christianity, about hell and damnation and so on. I think most New Zealanders would be horrified if they knew, Christian New Zealanders would be horrified if they really knew the full dogma of Christianity. And of course they don't believe it. Most New Zealanders, I think, who are Christians, at least the ones I know, have been very mild. They don't really have much of an understanding of the theology behind it, and wouldn't agree with it if they did. Most of them, for example, if not all of them, would believe in gay rights. That we shouldn't be discriminating against gays. I say most, I haven't really asked all of them yet, but the ones I've asked have been astounded that it's even a question. Yet obviously, if you ask fundamentalist Christians, it's abhorrent, it's sinful. So there's that. They wouldn't be. So that's the distinction between a cultural Christian, I guess. They have a very simplistic understanding of Christianity and are otherwise functional in terms of their morality. And I think fundamentalists, who I think are compromised in terms of their morality. Any other questions?
So, I'm just wondering about the process that goes on. I missed the first bit, maybe you covered it. When they're trying to get a religious education into schools, does every single board of trustees of a school have to approve the program for it to be done when the school is closed? Is that how it goes through?
The board of trustees has to approve that they have religious education, but once it's established, they don't have to reapprove it every year.
Okay. And is it in the majority of schools in New Zealand?
Probably no, not the majority.
Not the majority.
Roughly 40%.
Okay.
So again, we're currently doing a survey which will get that a bit better, but roughly 40%.
And do these religious teachers, do they have a code of conduct that they have to follow?
No. The only requirement is that they pass a police vetting process. And there's also been a push to have former teachers or actual teachers take these lessons. So, I mean, those are good things, I guess. But there's no solid curriculum, for example. There's no real third-party observation of what's being taught and how it's being taught.
Do you know if there's a sort of a geographic distribution of the schools where it's happening and those where it's not?
Again, we're doing the research to find this kind of thing out, to be more scientific about it. Our general understanding at the moment is that the major urban centres are less likely to have less likely to have religious schools than the rural areas. But until we really, as I say, I mean, that's not very well supported at the moment, but that's the kind of feeling that we've got so far.
And how much progress have you made with the survey so far?
We targeted North Shore at first, so we distributed the survey to the North Shore, and we've got a good portion of those surveys back. But there are something like 2,000 schools in New Zealand, so we're planning to roll the survey out to those schools, but we have logistical problems in terms of being able to deal with the number of survey results.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me like this is something that you should be able to just ask, something that the government should be keeping track of themselves, or the school, the Ministry of Education or whatever.
Yes, well, the best source of information will be the CDC, of course. They have this information on hand, but I'm pretty sure that because it's outside the realm of the school, technically it's happening when the school is closed, they kind of take the blind eye approach to it. They're not really trying to track that. They want to keep away from it.
Even ERO wouldn't keep records of, like in classes where you take 20 minutes out of school time and that sort of thing for religious
Employment
education.
relations act, you mean?
Just like primary schools and that sort of thing. I just remember having it when I was at primary school. We had schools like during the middle of the day stopping.
Yeah. So they actually closed the school in the middle of the day.
Well, it wasn't shut. But just my class was, and then the next one, and the next one, and something like that. And other schools were like that.
Yes. So this is part of how ludicrous it is. I mean, what they're actually claiming is that particular class is closed in some nebulous way.
Well, I just wondered if ERO included it because there'd be reduced class time on that day once a week or whatever that system is.
It is reduced class time on that day, so that's how they record it.
But they don't, like, the New Zealand economic system doesn't record it specifically which schools are implementing it and which aren't and that sort of.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I am sort of involved in open data. I don't know whether they've got those data sets. I guess we could ask. I haven't really thought of it.
Yeah. My understanding is that the schools have to stay open for a certain number of hours per year. the ridiculous point that when you finish your exams as a senior, you've got to hang around, like hang there to fill up that quota. So is that, when they close the school for that period of time, aren't they having to make it up later?
That's true. And some don't, some are breaking the law in that regard. We haven't identified which, but it's an ongoing investigation.
So yeah, I think like what he was saying, it's the Education Review Office, isn't it? That go around and do those reports on schools.
Yeah, so they-
Surely they'd be keeping an eye on how long they're open for, making sure they're sticking to their hours and stuff. But they must have an idea of which schools do the registering and which don't. It's just a matter of trying to find out that information, I guess.
Yeah, I've read the ERO reports from some of the schools. They generally don't, the ones I've read haven't mentioned the religious aspect, so I'm not sure whether they're specifically tracking that.
Yeah. I guess they would, because it's clear.
Well, yeah, no, that's what I mean.
Obviously, it would be a lot harder when, you know, it's half the school closed.
Yeah.
Or it's one classroom at
You
a
know,
time.
it's because, you know, the rest of the school's open, so, you know, technically they are teaching during those hours.
Mm.
So,
Is that common though for schools to do the partially open close thing? I know I heard about the Torway school, but isn't that a rare occurrence?
No, it doesn't seem that rare.
Oh,
I
okay.
mean, we've got a number of cases that are already. I think the best, I mentioned Devonport because I was most impressed by them because they definitely have it out of school hours. So they start, the school day starts for them about 9, and they hold their religious class at 8:30 to 9. So and they're doing it in a venue which is not one of the classrooms. So I don't really want to, I'm not promoting Devonport, you know, I'm not promoting the idea of religious indoctrination, but if you were going to, that's how I think most of the schools should be doing it if they're going to do it at all. But they're not doing that. They're clearly having the rest of the school open, like you're saying, when clearly that's not, you can't close one schoolroom, it just doesn't make sense.
I guess, okay, I'll give an example of something that happened recently to my nephew. He's now about to turn 6. So they have these religious indoctrination at the primary school he's going to, and, you know, the school is closed during...
Which school is that?
Anchorage Park.
Okay.
And he came home one day and, well, you know, basically the way I heard the story was that he was asked at school, you know, do you believe in God? In one of these classes, and he said no. He said, oh, why not? He said, oh, because, you know, you can't see and smell and touch it, and so, you know, doesn't exist. And he was basically told that he's wrong, he's bad, he's, you know, naughty for saying this, you know, and to a 5-year-old. And I guess the thing is, how do you stop?
How does parents feel about that?
I don't know. I haven't really discussed it much with her, my sister. She's a solid mother, actually. And then I guess part of the problem with it is that my mother is on the board and is in favour of having,
despite having
mother in schools.
So are you trying to get it completely out, or are you more aiming towards, sorry, this is the first part you're talking about work, or are you aiming more towards to say that the atheists come in and have their little bit of 5 minutes, and the Muslims come in and have 5 minutes, and
I think
expose the kids to the range that's out there?
I don't think. For starters, there's already a secular values curriculum. Okay, so there's no reason to have this kind of competitive system where the atheists hold their meeting and the Christians theirs and so on.
No, I mean, not at the same time, but more in terms of, you've got a kid that's Christian, shouldn't they be introduced to the philosophy of Buddhism and then the philosophy of Islam, and then we think they're all fucking crazy kid because there's nothing there, us, and then the kids actually grow up with some sort of context.
Yeah. In the first part I said that we definitely support what you're talking about is comparative religion. So being able to do a study of the different religions and what they believe and talk about that kind of thing, which isn't indoctrination. It's simply saying these are what these different people believe, and then if it's the way you frame it. Obviously, you know, if I say to you, Jesus is the living God, you have to believe it. That's very different to saying, well, Christians believe Jesus is the living God, and obviously there's there's a huge difference in how that's delivered. But clearly, the religious indoctrination is the first way. They're being told as a matter of fact that these things are true in exactly the same way this gentleman was doing. Right? And not only are they told it's fact, but if they're told that if they don't believe it, well, I mean, that's pretty gratuitous actually. That's probably the worst I've heard. But they're told that they have to believe it, and that they're wrong if they don't. So that's the exact opposite of the kind of secular values that we want to instill in children: is questioning authority, demanding the facts, the evidence to be presented, rational, reasonable thinking. It's the exact opposite of that, and the irony is that they're meant to be teaching these things in their secular values classes.
I was just thinking that if I had a child who came home from school with a picture of the world serpent wrapped around the tree, I'd be quite happy with that. But I guess part of it is they're saying, okay, we're just teaching them about these religions, but you don't get a child sent home with a picture of Yggdrasil or of any of the older religions. It's only I've only seen pictures of Christianity, and occasionally I have seen some Muslim or Jewish pictures too, but it only seems to be Judeo-Christian religions, well, the Abrahamic religions that are.
Yeah, I haven't seen Buddhists, for example.
Yeah.
I don't think the Buddhists tend to be less aggressive, shall we say, with that. And they don't need that kind of promotion. But even if they did have that, I mean, we would object to them being given preference as well. So I mean, the whole point is, as far as this campaign is, we don't want any particular point of view, even atheist, taught as in preference. We're not promoting atheism in schools. We're promoting a secular view where we all get along. We all, we're not saying that the Christian kids have to tootle off and be opted out when we teach our secular morality here. Right? We're saying that it includes all children, and we should be able to agree on what those values are. And I think we can agree on those things. I mean, we all seem to like the idea of compassion and self-responsibility and patience, and some of the schools are talking about commitment, being able to follow through on commitment. So there's a whole lot of ideas which I think are good. We're not talking necessarily about, I'm not sure, some of these things are not necessarily the difference between moral and immoral, but they're good civic values. And a lot of them are talking about the civic values of being good citizens as well. And that's really great stuff.
Do you find it hard to get across the message that you're against teaching religious indoctrination in school while still saying that you support comparative religious studies? I mean, is it?
Or to say that you're against the indoctrination, but you're not against Christianity specifically.
Well, I mean, when I was on Radio Rima a few weeks ago, I don't think that was fully understood. It's very difficult, and certainly the perception is that you're bashing Christians. It's like, oh, why are you bashing Christians? They're just teaching a good word. And it's like, it's a religious dogma, and it doesn't really have a place being taught to people who aren't. I go back to the consent of parents. They have to have informed consent. If you're going to teach a child and indoctrinate a child, you really should at least have the informed consent of the parent. At least. Ideally, we don't want that kind of thing going. I don't really like the idea of any kind of indoctrination. But I also have a pretty firm commitment to freedom. So, I mean, I can't really say, well, you parents, you don't have the right to teach your children what you want. I don't agree with it. I don't support them in that. But that's my personal opinion, and I'm not going to force everyone to believe what I want to believe. But I do have a commitment to a secular view where they can't force their ideas on other people's children, which is exactly what's happening.
How can you get around things like, I went to Mount Grammar, which isn't a particularly religious school like St Kennedy is, my siblings went. But I still need to say the Lord's Prayer every night and house prayer in the hostel I was in, and every Friday we said that in assembly. We've got a lot of tradition going down, and that to me, I can still recite it now despite being a fundamental atheist. How are you going to get around that, especially with Catholic or Christian schools where their very core is the indoctrination of the children?
This touches on, I've just talked about the freedom of parents, and I think Richard Dawkins has a view that the children have rights as well. So I mean, just because you happen to have a child doesn't mean you have unlimited rights over that child. You know, obviously you can't kill them; they don't belong to you. They don't live and die at your will. And similarly, that you can't abuse them. You can't stick them in ovens and do all sorts
The Bible
of.
says you can.
Yes, the Bible says you can. Hopefully we've got past that. So yeah, I think parental rights have a limit. I think there needs to be a balance between the rights of parents and the rights of children. I don't think it's completely one way. I mean, parents need, they have certain responsibilities towards children, so they need additional rights to be able, at least until, the children are no longer children. But I don't know. I mean, I'm not. I can't say in clear conscience that they have no right to say whether they can, what kind of religious school they go to. But yeah, I guess me and Dawkins are, I can't decide. I'm undecided. Dawkins is definitely on the side that we shouldn't be able to do this. Parents should have no right to be able to send them to religious schools. And then there are other people who support freedom of choice for the parents.
Well, I guess the main thing with religious schools is that a parent sending their child to a Catholic school knows that they're going to be indoctrinated as Catholic.
Yeah.
It's
informed consent.
Yeah.
Essentially,
Yeah.
that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Whereas, if you send your child to a secular school, to a purportedly secular school, a state-run school, where you don't really have a choice about the school, or at least a very small choice of schools, so say there's 2 schools in your area and both are religious, what do you do? I mean, there's no real choice involved. You're legally obligated to send your child to a school, and if they both have religious studies, what are you going to do? You can opt them out. Well, if you opt them out, basically you're stigmatising your child. And the other thing is, you're also not teaching them the values. I mean, if you have a values program but you make it contingent on them going to religious studies, it means effectively it's discriminatory against your child.
Another factor with that informed consent there, I suppose there's different levels of it, because when Natasha's boys went to primary school, they basically said you can have you can have Bible studies, Islam, or go to the library, and it wasn't at all clear what go to the library meant. I guess you can ask them this, but I mean, it's without actually getting the child to go along and see what it's like. It's hard to know exactly what you're getting them into. Like, how many children go to the library and what do they do at the library? Is it just going to be them by themselves in a detention-like situation?
It's very much a detention situation.
when I was in primary school, there was one who went to the library.
I just think what do you think?
Awesome.
Go to the library.
That's more about achievement.
If it isn't by design, it's got very, very interesting coincidence.
So shouldn't we then be trying to get comparative studies so you don't get to opt out? We treat this as just like you treat civics.
There is, and so that's what I'm saying. There are values programs already in schools, secular values programs. I'm surprised because we've been doing this study on the North Shore, a survey on the North Shore. One of the questions I was asking is, do you have a secular values program? And it's interesting that almost 100% of schools run some kind of values program, including the religious ones. The difference with the religious ones is they're trying to, they're linking that one to the religious ones. So when they're sending information home, do you want to opt out? Parents are thinking that if they opt out of the religious studies, that they're going to not go to the whole values program.
So shouldn't it be better then that we have a national standard and where we have these, the values as you're putting it, but also exposure to each of the ways of thinking?
That's kind of dangerous.
I guess that when we're talking about, if we're talking about primary school-age kids, they're not going to be exposed to things like political discussions and other similar complex topics, because you're talking, religion is a complex topic. Do you think we really need to be teaching people at 7 years old about a relatively complicated topic if they haven't even been taught maths properly, for example?
Yeah, it probably belongs more to secondary school, like the religious studies.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think there's something you only do at one stage. Just like maths, you don't start with advanced calculus, you go with 1 plus 1. When they're young, you start off with teaching them about Adam and Eve, and then you teach them about Muhammad flying up to the horse, and then you teach them about Zeus and his thunderbolts, and then as they get older, they're like, oh, hang on, they can't all be right, and maybe they're all wrong.
Yeah, but it's not integral to the education of our children. I think if it got to high school and it was like a part of social studies or something to go over the world religions, and then it's like, good, there's your basics. It's not like maths that you have to build it up all throughout the thing.
It's also probably a lot easier to learn about each of the religions and spend a few hours and to learn about them versus maths. Does take many years for a kid to be able to
But
skills.
they're very receptive at that age. So if you leave them to have be dominated by one mindset, it's going to be much harder to break through. They did a study recently in the States where they asked a whole range of religious questions, and the atheists nailed it. And the Christians were failing their own thing. And they had no idea about anything about Islam or anything else. And that comes from them having this very narrow mindset from day one. And I don't think having a narrow mindset's a good thing.
The job of the school isn't to teach them for the purpose of breaking down their belief system either. Like that's just taken it to the opposite extreme. I mean, the point is that they're supposed to inform people about what the beliefs are, just to give them context for their other knowledge, like in terms of like a social studies class kind of thing. But it's not about breaking through. It's just about providing context. And it's up to them how they want to deal with it. And if that means that they've already been indoctrinated by their parents for the rest of their lives, that's them and their parents' problem. It's not the role of the government to impose this, breaking people down and building them up again.
I'm not saying this bit that we have to convert them all over to atheism, not at all. But I think that they've got no chance for making the decision for themselves if they're not exposed to life.
But the thing is, we're not saying don't give them a religious education if that's what you want. But what we're saying is, don't treat it like a part of a secular education.
Yeah, I agree with that. But
basically don't start by giving children who don't have permission to indoctrinate.
Well, that's bad in itself, but I think making sure that they're isolated from the rest is something we should be striving against, because I do think, from the talkers, I think that is a form of child abuse. And they had a debate about faith-based schools, and the rabbi brought up a really fantastic point, and he was completely against them, because he said, how are you going to expect understanding and reasonable attitudes towards each other to express if we're going to isolate the Jewish kids over here, and Muslim kids over here, and Christian kids over here, and have the atheists wherever the hell they're going to have them. Of course you're going to have this prejudice and we're going to stay segregated, and that's not the way to have a coherent society. You need to actually understand how they feel about it.
There's quite a difference in degree between half an hour every week or couple of weeks and a faith-based school, which is all of your schooling life. So I don't know how much that argument applies to religious education in the secular school.
Often in secular schools they do also teach a range of world religions and that sort of thing as well. I went to a Catholic school and we did learn about a bunch of other different religions. Atheism itself.
At what point in your education?
Third form or fourth form, so one of the first years of high school. We did a couple of different parts to different degrees, but that was part of the Catholic religious education.
So I mean, that's actually, I guess that's what we're talking about in terms of religious education. At that level, sort of the 13, 14-year-old level, giving children a little bit of context about what religion's about and what they are and so on. That's fine. I mean, that's teaching about religion. It's not teaching, indoctrinating children into religion. It's just when you get to 6 and 7, that's kind of where they're aiming for. They're trying to get the children before they can develop the critical thinking skills, and they trust the teachers implicitly, so that effectively you can go in there and form opinions in children that will last their entire lives. And I don't think the answer to that is trying to teach them the different kinds of religion. I think that could be kind of rather confusing for them. There's going to be a whole lot of teachers teaching completely different things. They're just going to get confused with it at that age. It's only when they're about 13 that they can start to really appreciate that people might actually be lying to them, kind of, or at least showing them different, more complex points of views.
What happens if you do your survey and you find that the kind of vast majority of parents either support or don't care about this?
So this isn't a survey of parents.
Oh, it's not.
So this is a survey of the schools themselves and their practices. So we're also conducting, we're collecting info. It's not through a survey, but we're collecting information from parents about their experience with the schools. So there's little point in taking it from one point of view, or just one point of view, because the schools are obviously going to try and paint themselves in the best possible light, hopefully without lying about it. So we're going to get the information from the surveys from the schools, but we're also going to effectively advertise the Secular Education Network, which will collect information from parents about what's actually going on on the ground, what's the parents' experiences. And then from that, we can get a more cohesive view of what's actually going on the ground.
You mentioned before that one of the things that people could do would be to complain to the Human Rights Commission.
Yes.
And what kind of complaints have happened in the past, or what's come out of those complaints?
There's been a pretty steady stream of complaints, but perhaps what hasn't been done is a concerted collection of the complaints. In other words, if one child or another child, or parent, complains to the commission about a particular instance of discrimination, they can step in and have a discussion with the school, and basically it gets resolved that way or not. So the way they usually deal with it is to try and deal with the parties concerned and have a meeting and try and sort out the problems. The issue here is that it isn't a problem between just one school and some children. The problem is that it's discrimination happening that's effectively government endorsed. In other words, the legislation itself is contrary to the Bill of Rights.
So my question is, have those complaints actually made any changes?
No, and I don't think they couldn't in that context, because you're not involving the parties that need to be involved. What would have to happen through the Human Rights Commission is a more general and abstract case to say that, well, actually it's not that abstract. We would effectively be taking a case against the New Zealand government to say the legislation itself is discriminatory, and these are the parents who are being affected by your discriminatory behaviour, and therefore, how are you going to remedy this in the law? And so there'll be effectively you challenge the government to say, hey, there's a problem with the law, this is the problem, this is the effect that it's having on the population, please fix it. And of course they have no, it gets rather complicated legally in terms of how much power the Human Rights Commission has to be able to affect that kind of change. Obviously they're not Parliament, they can't make law, but they do have some powers to, shall we say, encourage the politicians to take action in those cases.
They can make declarations.
Yes.
So you'd be in favour of a petition or something like that of people that wanted to complain to the Human Rights Commission?
Well,
a collective group could complain.
Yeah. So there's petitions are slightly different. So we could make a collective complaint to the Human Rights Commission, and effectively it would cite the government as the other party rather than the school. The other way is more direct, and that's a petition. But that's a lot more direct because you need to be able to there's a threshold for petitions, so you need to be able to, well, assuming we were going to do something really meaningful, like say, ask for a referendum. Obviously there are no binding referendums, but if we were to try and aim for having a nationwide referendum at a national election, I would love to do that, but at the moment I'm not entirely convinced that we would get the kind of support nationally that we would need.
I'd say there'd be a lot of apathy towards it.
Yes, it's not the kind of issue which I think would be hugely important in the nation's mind. Could be wrong. I'd love it if I were wrong, but I think it's a much more realistic goal to make a complaint to the institution at this point.
To me, it doesn't seem like a government imposition of anything. If the parents are in control of the school's PTA and Board of Trustees, and those bodies are making decisions on the kind of religious education that goes on in their school, it seems to me that the school's community are the ones that are making the decisions on what's being taught, and thus they're the ones in control. And they might be using government property, but in effect the government is facilitating the community's decisions on religious education.
Yeah, you can't make. This argument's been used quite a bit. It's like, well, surely you should respect the majority. It's a bit like democracy. You just decide what kind of religion we're going to have in this area. No, ain't going to fly. You can't. Effectively, it's denying the right of the freedom of religion. You can't have a majority deciding what religion is going to be taught in a certain area, or what religion people are going to be able to.
And is it going to be aimed towards the government because there's a law that allows it to go on? So if the government would change the law, then they wouldn't be able to run it?
What kind of effect? Okay, closing that loophole would have. What kind of effect would that have?
Effectively, it would mean that the school would have to do what, say, Devonport do at the moment, which was you'd have to have it separated. So you could still have a religious education class, but it would have to be completely out of school hours. The people running it would have to have some kind of hiring agreement, just like any other organisations which carry on. I'll give you a good example. Karate. I used to be involved in karate. You would hire school halls. A lot of the children from the school would come after school. They paid money. We would teach them. We had an agreement with the school for payment, that kind of thing. So, I mean, all of that would be perfectly legitimate if you were doing it in a religious context. So if you wanted to teach your children like that, as long as it was out of school hours and you had there wasn't any perception that the school was, or the state was endorsing that particular religion, you were just hiring the hall, you were just teaching the kids that happened to be coming along, they would be fine. And that's very close to what Devonport's doing. But it's completely, it's nothing like a huge majority of the New Zealand state schools who are holding religious indoctrination doing.
I think it makes all the difference, like I say, just having it outside normal school hours, just starting 8:30 instead of 9 or something.
Or after.
Or after.
3 till 3:30.
Yeah, although kids are probably more likely to stick around without permission. It might not be as deliberate as if you're taking your children there at 8:30 to get them there on time.
But even or after would be fine as long as they were allowed to actually leave, as opposed to being sent to the library.
Yeah.
I guess I can say that's part of the point. Saying the school's closed but your child's not allowed to leave is...
The main difference, though, is... I keep going back to the informed consent, because what's happening is at Devonport, there is informed consent going on, because the parents who send their children there, one, are dropping them off earlier, so they have to know in order to do that. And they're giving explicit consent that that's going to happen. Whereas in the other schools, the parents find out about it, well, I didn't go into some of the things that's going on. So the parents, for example, will find out about it after the fact that their children have gone. When they do find out about it, they can be expected to send letters to the school every term, or even in one case, every week. So in other words, basically having to excuse them for every class that goes on, which is obviously a huge
What about
waste of time.
instead of having it after school hours, is there any places that do like an opt-in, so like the Christian kids go to the library? If that makes sense, like so you specifically have to say, yes, I want my kid to go in these classes.
We would like to.
Because that would
if
just
we
take
can't
a
get-
change in school policy rather than the law.
But surely that would take a chunk out of normal class time, out of the, unless it was during kind of the recess, in which case the Christian kids would be missing out on that class break. Or if it was during the class time.
If it's during school hours, they will miss out on something.
Well, if
I'm
they're
willing
doing
to-
the lunch break, then that's the majority with me, because it's the lunchtime and they're running around. And if you want to sit down and sit playing sports with your mates,
You
I'd
would have
have
a lot of
really want to
children
go.
hating religion if you had that.
I think that's an excellent policy. Yeah, so I mean, at the moment, and recently in the North Shore Times there was a statement by, I think it was the Board of Trustees at Torbay, and they were saying they didn't want to give anything in the alternate to Christian because otherwise the children wouldn't go to the Christian class.
What?
They wouldn't want to give.
Well, yeah, they didn't. So they hold the Christian classes. They don't want to offer anything else because it might undermine the Christian classes. In other words, they wouldn't want to do, say, secular or Muslim or anything else. They're dreadfully afraid that the kids might find something else more interesting.
They've got lots of Christians on their school board or something.
Yes. Well, the chairman of the board of trustees is a fundamentalist Christian, I believe, and I'm not sure, but I think most of the board members are also Christians.
Well, I guess there's also the problem that a lot of people will call themselves Christian when they're not and just go along with what other Christians say because they're Christian.
Well, maybe in this particular case, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I mean, on that particular case, but in general, because there are a lot of people who consider themselves Christian because they see it as
It's a community thing.
the community thing. So if someone says, we'll have Christian education, they go, oh yeah, I'm for that because we're a Christian community, even if they don't believe anything to do with it.
Or people that aren't strictly atheist, but they're very apathetic towards religion, but they don't want to appear to be like in the face of a bunch of Christians on all of that sort of. You don't want to be the one campaigning to remove religion from school when you're not particularly enthusiastic about it.